Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. I want to thank you guys for opening up this video. The Loop Source inspired me to make this video because he made a video about, he says, create the craziest vibes with 7 fire chord progressions. So I'm going to give you guys my perspective on chords and how to get deeper into chords and how important chords are. So here's an example. So whenever your beat feels like empty, you may need chords, and chords are like the glue to a track, and also sonics, but that's a different conversation. So what we'll do is create different vibes, and I'm going to give you guys a framework, meaning like a mindset you can use to go into your sound design, into your music theory. People skip over music theory. I'm going to say this here because I want you guys to understand how important it is to make better melodies. Understanding harmony is the secret, because melodies derive from harmony for the most part and a lot of harmonic rules, but people want to skip over the chord part because it looks complicated. So let's start from scratch. All right, let's create a dark vibe. There are 2 chords that make a dark vibe. Let's right click, go to piano roll. But before we get into the chords, we need to identify what makes a chord. What is a chord? If I close my eyes and I pick a random note, every chord has DNA. I call these chord codes, and I was the first one to do this. So if you go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory essentials, I was the first one to create what's called chord codes. Okay, so I call them chord codes, a very specific way to go about music theory. Okay, I didn't create the original concept, but the chord codes approach, that was mine. Okay, so let's start here at D, and we're going to count up this keyboard. The chord code for a minor chord is 0, 3, 7. So wherever you start, this is called 0, the root note. There's no distance from this point. So it's 0, and then we count up the keys until we finish out the chord code. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So you're just counting 4, 5, 6, 7. So a 5-year-old can count. Pretty sure younger than 5, but I'm not sure the starting age of counting. So now they made their first chord, and all they did was they started at a note, 0. We're talking about scale degrees for all the traditional music theory folks. We're not talking about scale degrees. These are semitone values for notes. When you sound design, they use semitone values, not scale degrees. Okay, so starting here is 0. Okay, that's going to help you guys in sound design too. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 0, 3, 7 makes the minor chord no matter where you are on the actual keyboard. Now, the next chord you guys want to learn is called a suspended second. In short, basically you're going to copy the minor chord over to make this simple. Take this, what's called a minor third. You don't need to memorize every word I'm saying here. And pull this down 1 note, hit shift down in FL Studio. This creates what's called a suspended second chord. The chord code for this is 0, 2, 7. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's 0, 2, 7. So you can use numbers to create chords. And it creates an infinite tension because we have what's called half step resolution. I teach that in my music, which one is that in? I guess my music theory magic course teaches about intervallic resolution. Okay, now what we'll do now is get a little more advanced. So those are the 2 chord types that give you the dark sound. Really, you could use these 2 chords and be fine. But let me show you some additional chords. The additional chord here is if we take this minor third and then we make the chord code 0, 5, 7. A perfect fourth is always 5 notes from the root note. So you can count from this note D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That gives you what's called the perfect fourth. And the perfect fifth is 7 notes away from the bottom note. So you start at your bottom note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This gives you another tension, but usually I use suspended fourths more so in different styles of composition, but you guys can also try this chord. So all we're doing is changing the middle note. Now let's add more darkness to this. Darkness is also a frequency range. So we're going to copy all the bottom notes, hit Control to highlight all of them. Hit Shift to duplicate. Let's hit Control down in FL Studio. And now we're just going to take that root note and pull it down 2 octaves and add 2 octaves. So now it's going to have that darker frequency to pull from, around 60 and 75 hertz. And simply having that low, octave gives you that dark tone simply because of what it is. So let's hit Control down. It's like when you play a really low note on a piano, it goes, it just gives you a dark vibe. So we can change out those dual octaves. Okay, so there's 4 layers, and I teach this in my my melody mastery course at busyworksbeats.com/melody mastery. If you're confused about all these courses, just go to busyworksbeats.com/premium, because there it explains everything that we have. But in melody mastery, I talk about the 4 layers to melody. You have the top line of the melody, the harmony section of the melody, the contrast layer, and the rhythm. So basically, when we created these chords, this is called the harmony section. When we added this bass area, this is called the contrast. So now I'm just stacking these components to build a bigger sound. And now let's add what's called a top line, or the memorable melody. I'll give you guys a couple rules. Usually speaking, I start 1 octave higher than the highest note so that the ear does not confuse the top line from the chords. Very important there. And then from here, we could use a lot of different strategies. I go over a lot of strategies in melody mastery. I'll just go over a couple. This is called a neighboring tone, for example. And we're just using that perfect fifth to kind of bounce back and forth between the, I know I'm speaking like Chinese to people who don't know music theory, but basically there's a concept where you go somewhere, you come back. And we're using what's called intervallic resolution to make that seem more cohesive. And then we could use half steps. This is called chromaticism. I teach this too in melody mastery. So here I'm going out of key on purpose with this note, because half steps like the resolve down. So it creates tension. Let's add some approaching notes here. Okay, so we don't need to add 1,000 notes to make this sound like a full melody. I think it'd be overkill to add more notes. Also, we could try octave. So let's hit control down, pull this down an octave. Remember, the darker, lower the frequencies, usually the darker it sounds. Okay, now let's get into more advanced concepts here for people who want to learn a little bit deeper. So let's take what's called a 2-5-1 chord progression. Now when I say 2, I need to define what that means. So firstly, if we use all the white notes starting from C, the reason we do this is because it's easy. It's all the white notes, simplest thing to remember. So here is C, and then we're going to add all the white notes. So this is the scale degree approach, the traditional approach to music theory. I skip this. I bypass this because you have to learn too much to get started. So that's why I teach chord codes to get started. Then I teach traditional music theory. So here we have what are called scale degrees. When people say 2-5-1, they really mean the 2nd, the 5th, and the 1st. But they're lazy with their language, and that's why people get confused with chord codes. So for example, we have the first note of the scale at C. If the scale starts here, what is a scale? A scale is a sequence of notes that somebody chose to like. There are a lot of scales out there in the world with different tunings and different everything. So we're just starting here at C. Okay, and going back up to C. So that's the sequence of notes that we like in this case, the C major scale. You don't need to memorize this. I'm just teaching you guys where this language comes from. So the root note here is called the first. The D, because it's the second note in the scale, it's called the second. E is the third note in the scale, so it's the third. F is the fourth note of the scale, so it's called the fourth. G is the fifth. A is the sixth. My tongue got twisted. A is the sixth. B is the seventh. And then C is back to the tonic, or the root note, or the tonal center. Okay, so that's where the numbers come from in traditional music theory when they're speaking about intervals or scale degrees. Okay, I know we're getting a little bit esoteric here, so I'll just show you guys the application here. We're going to take what's called the second scale degree, then we're going to go to the fifth scale degree, and then we're going to go back to the first scale degree. This is called a 2-5-1. And remember, it's a lazy language. It should be called second, fifth, first, but they say 2-5-1. Now the question is, how do you make chords from just this? Okay, the way you make chords in traditional scales is you take the note that you're on and you skip notes of the scale. So you can go forward or backward. So in this case, let's go up the scale. Let's start at D and let's skip E, go to F, skip G, go to A. This creates our first what's called a 3-note chord or a triad. A triad, the chords don't need to be 3 notes. There's old definitions for a chord that say 2 notes or more. It's 2 notes harmonizing. That's what a chord is in the old definition. That explains a lot when you get into deeper music theory. Currently, people define a chord as 3 notes or more, but it's a lot easier mentally speaking when you understand it as 2 notes or more, in my opinion. So here we're at D, we skip E, go to F, skip G, go to A. This creates a 3-note chord called a triad. So let's do this for each note. We started at D, we skipped every note going up the scale. Let's see if we start at G, we go up the scale. So I need to make the scale a little bit longer here to see this. Now we're at G, we're gonna skip A, go to B, skip C, go to D. Here we have G major. Now how do I know it's a G major chord? Because it has a chord code 047, whereas a minor chord is 037. So remember, the 0 is the root note or where you start, and you count up your keyboard note by note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this helps you identify chord codes. If you want the chord codes, go to busyworksbeats.com/music theory to get the chord code chart for free. But once you understand chord codes, it'll open your whole mind of music theory. So here we have the minor chord code. The reason I know this is a major chord code, not because of the scale, not because of the scale degree, it's because I know the notes that make up the actual chord. And this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 047 is the major chord, 037 is the minor chord. That's the difference. Now we're going to land on C here. We're going to skip D, go to E, skip F, go to G. So this is the basic, what I call vanilla voicing, meaning very just bland, kind of straightforward voicing. So when we say dark, it can also mean gospel-y dark. So let's take these top notes. I'm going to show you guys a technique here called a first inversion. Now technically, if we take the root note, we pull it up an octave, this is called the first inversion. The problem with this is that this chord's way down here, this chord's way up here. It's a lot of distance here. So it's going to sound like forced. And if you were to play that on the piano, it might not sound natural. So let's take this entire structure, hit Control down. So remember, I pulled the root note up an octave. This is called the first inversion. Now the reason this gives it a dark tone is because of what's called the half step. So this B going to C, a half step is whenever you go from one note directly to a note above or below. And that's what creates that dark tone in the bass. So now we could copy our same technique, take these bottom notes, pull them down. And now let's stack these another octave, Control down. So now we get like a hopeful dark. So now we're getting into the mixing of moods. And you know, the Loop Source talks about this too, and I've spoken about this before, is when you go upward in your chords, you usually create a happier vibe. When you go downwards, you create a darker vibe. So why is that important? Is because you can blend happiness and darkness. It's kind of like if you go outside and it rains, but it's like sunlight, you can do the same thing with your music. It looks sad, but it's like you still have sunlight. So major chords are usually associated with sun energy or fire energy. I teach this in my busyworksbeats.com/music theory magic. It goes way deeper about the science. So major chords are associated with, explosive sun energy, fire energy, and outwardness, whereas minor chords are associated with introspective energy, inward energy. Now, how do I create tension? We can create a half step. So half steps are all about creating tension because they want to resolve. So what we'll do is instead of changing the entire chord, we're just going to change that root note, pull it up a half step. This is called chromaticism, when we're going note by note up the keyboard. So it's just note by note going up, even though we're going out of scale. The C sharp is not in our scale. So it's okay to go out of scale. Now we're creating a new chord type, and this chord type is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is a diminished chord at the end here, and that's what's going to create that nice tense sound, especially for gospel in this case. Alright, so my buffer length is going nuts. Hold on, y'all. Okay, so that's what creates that tenth sound, is that half step. So that's how you get the dark vibe. And remember, without that chord inversion, it will sound like this. Even actually B is the bass, so normally that would be G. So let's play it like this. It just sounds too vibrant and happy. Okay, so that's why we do all this, what's called voicing of a chord. We're switching up the chord notes and where they're positioned, which changes the whole entire vibe. So that's how you take a vanilla chord progression and make it darker. Now let's say we want to dun, dun. Okay, we're just going up to the next tone that's actually in our chord. This is why when you guys are thinking of melody, I try to stress so much that melody comes from the chords, because the melody that I hear in my head is coming from the fact that we're just breaking down the chord that we just created, and we're just going through what are called the intervals of the chord. So my ear wants to hear this little jumpy note. Okay, now let's get a little more advanced here. So I'm showing you guys the layers of music theory, how deep the rabbit hole can go. So now let's take these actual bottom chords and let's start adding this to our contrast sound. So I believe, yeah, here's a bass. We're gonna paste that into our bass. I think I have two basses. Now this bass, we need to hit Control up because of the sound itself. So now we're giving the bass notes a specific instrument to play, and I can even take away the original notes and allow that bass note to play. So now we are technically building one chord, but we're using two instruments. Okay, so now the bottom notes are going to our bass sounds. Let's see. It's kind of hard to hear, so now let's pull this down. So here's the bass layer. And now this clears up the mud, because now I don't have two instruments fighting for the same frequency space. They're completely separate instruments. Whereas if I were to just blend this in with the original, like this, the sound becomes very full. I mean, I think it sounds cool this way, but sometimes you guys don't need to layer, you know, the notes in the, you know, from one instrument to the next because it gets too full. I think I would like this top line sound effect. Let's see, let's add some top line. If you guys see these gray notes and you're wondering what that is, go to your piano roll options, go to view, go to ghost channels. That will turn that on in FL Studio. So now I'm going to go one octave higher than the highest note that we've created. So we're at A, and then it goes G all the way through. So here I'm going to start at this point to create a top line. Now this is more of a sound effect than it is a top line, but in Melody Mastery I go through the fact that you don't always need a melodic sound to be a top line. It's just an ear catcher sound. Okay, now let's go back to those four layers. Which layer are we not using? The rhythm section, where you have a top line, we have the harmony section, we have the contrast section, and rhythm can be added. Now again, you can separate this into a different instrument, but what we'll do is just copy this up an octave. Remember, rhythm creates distance, or it creates a difference, I should say, between the contrast layer. So if the contrast layer is moving slow, the rhythm section is going to move fast in this case. There's different rules that I teach, but there's no hard rules that govern this. So now I'm using chords to figure out which notes to add. And this is why you guys got to learn. Now this sound itself sounds artificial when we stretch it this far. So in this case, I wouldn't use this specific preset. My project's getting a little full. So let's try to use, instead of this top line, let's switch out this sound for something different so that we can manipulate the sound here. Let's go to, this preset's pretty cool. Okay, so now let's paste our rhythm into the top line instrument. Now, because it's a separate sound, I'm going to hit Control down. So see how these 4 layers stack up effortlessly once you guys understand the concepts of music theory behind it. It comes down to 4 things you need to understand: top line, harmony, contrast layer, rhythm section. So once you combine all those using all the music theory that I just taught, it makes all this stuff cohesive. And here we could add more effects. We're already at like 50 CPU, so these Arturia plugins are going crazy here. So I will see how many plugins we can add, but I don't want to stress the computer. So what I would do from here is add some kilohertz stuff, like maybe like a reverser for a piano type sound or a bell type sound. Reversers are pretty cool. Hold on, y'all, my screen froze. Give me a second. There we go. Now that sound is very like happy sounding because we associate that sound with like a very playful kind of thing. So you guys might go through and switch out the actual instrument. So now that we're switching the instrument, we need to be careful about which octave. So let's hit Control up. Something's out of key here. All right, so this doesn't have, this is actually using more than one note, so we're gonna get off that one. Keep in mind, an artist can also be the rhythm section, so we don't want to always think that the melody has to do everything. All right, now one last thing about darkness is really the effects you guys use. So let's group all these effects. Let's put them into one group. I'll just show you guys one effect because we're running out of time here. Let's highlight all these instruments, right click, route to this track only. And let's send them to what's called LuxVerb. The reason I'm using LuxVerb is because we can create 2 different layers of sound basically. And then we're going to turn on what's called the feedback. So this is like a granular delay. We're going to turn this up. Wow, my computer's about to blow up. All right, so this is not going to work the way I expected. Let's swap out these instruments just to show you guys you could do the same thing with like stock stuff. So we're at 52 CPU. So I'm going to swap this out for stock plugins because it's about to blow up my computer if I don't. All right, so let's use Flex instead. And there's a good piano if you guys go to Essential Pianos, go to Yamaha C7. This one's really good. And just turn off these effects right here. Turn these off. All right, so Arturia got my computer stressed out. Let's clone these 3 more times. And then we'll just copy the MIDI over. 1, 2, and 3. Sorry, it's taking forever, y'all. Once we get rid of these Arturia plugins, we should be good. All right, let's paste all the stuff. Boom, boom. Let's get rid of pigments. All right, now my computer can actually breathe. Okay. Now we just need to turn stuff down so it's not like screaming. So now we're going into LuxVerb. And in LuxVerb, we can do cool stuff. Mainly the feedback section is the cool part because we're adding like a shear sound. Hear that delay? Okay, so that's where we're adding to the sound, and what we could do is blend the dry and wet level. Now, most people use long reverbs. It just depends. On this one, I'll use a short reverb and then blend into the dry level. We're trying to add like little details, not like a huge sound. Also, there's something called the mod frequency. So here we'll create like this pitch wobble on the reverb itself. Let me solo it so you guys can hear. If I make a long tail, it'll go like woo, but if I make a short tail, it'll sound more like a chorus. So it goes, it's slowly going up. I'll exaggerate. Let's turn this all the way up. So now it's going like very fast. Okay, so we can pull this back. So here's where sound effects become more of the sound than the actual notes itself. So we're going to pull the reverb back. So now it sounds more like a phaser or chorus. And we're going to blend that in. Now another kind of, what's the word? I guess identifier. That's not the exact word I'm looking for. Trait. Another trait of dark melodies is to simply cut out the high frequencies. Because if darkness is a low frequency, then we're going to get rid of the high frequencies. Now this kind of takes away all the sound, but more of like a filter shape. Associates with darkness as well. I gotta figure out why my CPU is so high. So smash that like button. Let's figure out why the CPU is so crazy. If you guys want to learn more, go to busyworksbeats.com/premium. Subscribe if you're new. Share with a friend. Peace.